Sir, excuse me, sir. The words burst out before Ara could swallow them back. Arthur Blackwood, billionaire, looked up, a flicker of annoyance in his granite eyes. But it was the photo tucked in his wallet that stole Ara's breath. Her mother laughing, impossibly young. The same photo Ara wore in a locket, a memento of a father she never knew. That photo, in your wallet. Blackwood's face hardened. He moved to snap it shut. Too late. Ara knew her minimum wage life was about to get complicated. He has no idea Clara's kindness runs deeper than any Blackwood fortune. He thinks she's just a waitress. He doesn't know she has no idea that her quiet persistence might change everything. Sir, excuse me, sir. The words burst out before Ara could swallow them back. Arthur Blackwood, billionaire, looked up, a flicker of annoyance in his granite eyes. But it was the photo tucked in his wallet that stole Ara's breath. Her mother laughing, impossibly young. The same photo Ara wore in a locket, a memento of a father she never knew. That photo, in your wallet. Blackwood's face hardened. He moved to snap it shut. Too late. Ara knew her minimum wage life was about to get complicated. He has no idea Clara's kindness runs deeper than any Blackwood fortune. He thinks she's just a waitress. He doesn't know she has no idea that her quiet persistence might change everything. Ara Vance existed in two worlds. By day, she was a struggling waitress at the Vidian, a restaurant where the wine list cost more than her monthly rent. By night, she retreated to her cramped Queens apartment, haunted by the ghost of a life she thought she understood. That life was built on a foundation of stories, lovingly crafted by her mother, Clara Ara, before her untimely death 5 years prior. Stories of a whirlwind romance with a brilliant but penniless musician, Ara's father, who had tragically died before she was born. The Vidian hummed with the low thrum of wealth and privilege, a world of hushed conversations and clinking crystal. Ara moved through it like a ghost, a silent observer to lives she could only dream of. Tonight, however, the usual backdrop of opulence felt sharper, more defined. Arthur Blackwood, the man whose name echoed through the financial pages, was dining alone at Table 7, a corner booth offering a panoramic view of the city's glittering skyline. His presence had electrified the staff, a silent competition to ensure his every need was met. As Ara approached his table to refill his water glass, her heart hammered against her ribs. Blackwood, a man carved from granite and steel, radiated an aura of quiet power. He dismissed her with a grunt, his attention glued to his phone. Then he reached for his wallet, a sleek black leather accessory that probably cost more than her textbooks had. He flipped it open, not to extract a credit card, but to reveal a collection of faded photographs tucked behind plastic sleeves. Ara's world tilted. Her breath hitched in her throat. Time seemed to warp and bend around her. There, nestled amongst the billionaire's personal effects, was a photograph of her mother, Clara Ara. It was the photograph, the same candid shot she wore in her locket, a small silver keepsake that never left her neck. Her mother's head was thrown back in unrestrained laughter, her eyes sparkling with a joy that seemed to defy gravity. The very same photograph Clara Ara had always claimed was taken by Ara's father during a picnic on the day he proposed. A primal instinct surged through Ara, overriding years of practiced subservience. The restaurant faded away, the clatter of silverware and the murmur of conversations dissolving into a distant hum. All she could see was that impossible image, a piece of her heart clutched in the hands of this powerful, enigmatic stranger. A desperate question clawed its way to the surface. Why? He was about to close the wallet, to extinguish the fragile light of recognition that had flickered across his face. Ara couldn't let him. The years of training, the ingrained habit of invisibility, shattered. She lunged forward, her hand trembling as she pointed. That night, she has no idea that her quiet persistence might change everything, but it all starts with that one request: to conceal. And inside there were letters. They were tied with a faded blue ribbon, a thick stack of them. The envelopes were addressed to Miss Clara Ara Vance at an old New York address. Ara's hands shook as she picked up the top one. The handwriting on the envelope was bold and masculine. She pulled out the letter. It began, "My dearest Clara Ara, I'm counting the minutes until I see you tonight. The city feels gray and empty without you in it. I walked past the gallery today and saw that ridiculous painting of the three-legged dog, and it made me laugh, thinking of how you'd find some profound, beautiful meaning in it. You find beauty in everything. Mostly, I'm just writing this to say I love you. I'll love you tomorrow and the day after that, and for every day after that. Forever and always. Yours, Artie. Ella's breath caught in her throat. She opened another and then another. They were filled with passion, with inside jokes, with plans for a future that sounded bright and certain. They were beautiful, undeniable proof of a deep and profound love. This was him. This was the man her mother had loved. But then at the very bottom of the hidden compartment was something else. It wasn't a letter from him. It was a single folded piece of stationery, slightly yellowed with age. It was a draft. The handwriting, elegant and familiar, was her mother's. It wasn't addressed to anyone. It seemed to be a letter she had written but never sent. With a sense of impending doom, Ara carefully unfolded the page. The truth she knew with a chilling certainty was right here in her hands. The paper was fragile in Ara's hands. The blue ink of her mother's pen slightly faded, but perfectly clear. Liam sat beside her on the floor, a silent, supportive presence, sensing the gravity of the moment. The air in the small apartment was still and heavy, as if holding its breath. Ilara began to read aloud, her voice soft and trembling. To my Artie, if you are ever reading this, it means I have failed. It means I was not strong enough to disappear completely to become the ghost I need to be for you. I pray you never find it. I pray you hate me, that you curse my name, and move on to a life of happiness, the life you were born to live. It will be easier for you that way. Ara paused, swallowing hard against the lump forming in her throat. This was not the beginning of a simple goodbye. This was a confession. I went to your parents' house today. You were in a meeting, and I was going to surprise you with lunch. I let myself in the back gate as I always do. I was on the terrace when I heard them talking, your father and your mother. They were in the study. The window was open. They didn't know I was there. They were talking about us, about me. Your father called me a charming distraction, Artie, an unfortunate infatuation that you would eventually outgrow. Your mother was kinder, but her words hurt more. She said I was a sweet girl, but that I had no idea of the world I was trying to enter, that the pressure, the scrutiny, the expectations. She said it would crush a spirit like mine, that I would become a weight tied to your ankles, holding you back from your destiny. They weren't angry. They were just certain. They were planning my removal from your life as if I were a temporary piece of furniture. Liam reached out and placed a hand on his arm. Her voice was shaking, but she continued reading, compelled to see it through to the end. I ran. I was going to come to you to our apartment and tell you we had to leave tonight, right now, to prove them wrong. But something they said stuck with me. Your mother said he thinks he can protect her from it, but he can't protect her from what our world will turn her into. And I realized she was right. I looked at myself, Artie. I love painting. I love messy hands and cheap wine and sleeping in until noon. Your world is one of charity galas and board meetings and calculated smiles. I would have to change. Bit by bit, I would have to sand down all my rough edges until I was smooth and polished and perfect enough to stand by your side. And I would hate you for it. Not at first, but one day I would look in the mirror and not recognize myself. And I would resent you for the cage you built for me, no matter how gilded its bars. I thought that was the most painful realization, but I was wrong. The most painful realization came an hour later. There's something I haven't told you yet. For the past 2 weeks, I've been feeling different. I went to a doctor this morning before I went to your parents' house. I wanted to be sure before I told you my wonderful, terrifying news. Ayer's breath hitched. Her eyes scanned the next line, and a soft gasp escaped her lips. The world tilted on its axis. Artie, my love, we're going to have a baby. The words seemed to lift off the page and hang in the air, shimmering with the weight of 2 lost decades. Ilara felt the blood drain from her face. Liam let out a slow, quiet breath beside her. And that is why I have to leave. I cannot bring a child into that world. A child who would be seen as a half-breed. a scandal, a leverage point against their own father, a child who would have to fight for their grandparents, approval who would be judged and measured from the day they were born. I grew up with nothing but I grew up knowing I was wanted. I will not have our child feel like anything less. So I am running, I am creating a new story for our baby, a story where their father was a hero, a poor, simple man who would have loved them unconditionally, whose love for me was pure and uncomplicated by wealth or status, a man who was tragically taken from us. So there is no wound of abandonment, only a legacy of beautiful, perfect love. It is the kindest lie I can think of. Please don't look for me. Please live the incredible life you are meant to live. Be the titan they all know you can be. Find a good woman, a woman who belongs in your world, and be happy. Know that I will love you and only you until the day I die. You are not a chapter in my life, Artie. You were the whole book. Yours always, Clara Ara. The letter ended, slowly folded the fragile paper, her hands numb. The room was utterly silent, save for the sound of her own ragged breathing. The truth, it was here, and it was so much worse than she had ever imagined. Her mother hadn't been a liar in the way had feared. She hadn't been cruel or fickle. She had made an impossible, heartbreaking choice. She had sacrificed her own happiness, her one true love, to protect her unborn child, to protect from a life she feared would destroy them both. She had constructed a beautiful myth to live in, because the reality was too painful to bear. The story of the dead hero father wasn't a betrayal. It was an act of fierce, desperate maternal love. And Arthur Blackwood. He wasn't a villain who had abandoned her mother. He was a victim just as she was. He had lost the love of his life and the chance to know his own daughter because of a decision made from fear and love 23 years ago. They had all been living in the wreckage of that one terrible day. The tears that came now were not of anger or confusion. They were tears of profound, soul-deep sorrow. Sorrow for her mother's lonely life, for the love she gave up. Sorrow for Arthur, for the decades he'd spent wondering why. And sorrow for herself, for the father she never knew she had, and the truth that had just broken her heart into a million pieces. Liam wrapped his arms around her as she sobbed, holding the devastating, beautiful, tragic truth of her mother's love in her hands. The rest of the day passed in a blur of grief. Era didn't move from the floor, the unsent letter clutched in her hand like a sacred text. Liam stayed with her, making her tea. She didn't drink, and offering quiet comfort that barely penetrated the fog of her sorrow. Every memory of her mother was now cast in a new tragic light. Her wistful smiles when talking about father were no longer signs of romantic mourning, but of a deep secret and abiding heartbreak for the man she had willingly left behind. The fierce independence Clara Ara had instilled in her was not just a philosophy, it was a survival mechanism born from her own monumental sacrifice. Ilara now understood the melancholy that had always clung to her mother like a faint perfume. The sadness in her eyes, even when she was laughing. Clara Ara had been living with the ghost of Arthur Blackwood every single day. By morning, the storm of tears had passed, leaving an eerie, hollow calm. The grief was still there, a heavy weight in her chest, but it was now mingled with a new urgent sense of purpose. 2 lives had been derailed by this secret. Arthur Blackwood deserved to know the truth. He deserved to know why. He deserved to know he had a daughter. She found his number on the business card he had given her. It felt like lifting 100 weight to press the call button. Beatrice Hayes answered her voice as crisp and efficient as ever. Mr. Blackwood's office. "It's Lara Vance," she said, her own voice sounding foreign and distant. "I need to see him. It's important." There was a slight pause. "Mr. Blackwood has cleared his schedule for you, Miss Vance. He said to let him know whenever you called. He can see you immediately." An hour later, Ilara was back in the penthouse office. The view seemed less impressive today, the city below a muted gray. Arthur was standing by the window again, but this time he turned the moment she walked in. The question was etched on his face, a mixture of hope and dread. He had clearly been waiting in agony. Era didn't say a word. She simply walked to the coffee table and placed the yellowed unsent letter upon its polished surface. He looked from the letter to her face, his expression confused. "I found this," she said, her voice quiet but steady. It's from her. It's for you." His hands trembled slightly as he reached for the letter. He sat down heavily in the armchair and began to read. Alara watched as a lifetime of emotions played out across his face. Confusion turned to shock. Shock gave way to dawning, horrified understanding. By the time he reached the part about the baby, about her, a deep, guttural sound of anguish escaped his lips. The mask of the billionaire shattered completely, revealing the broken heart of the young man who had lost everything. All those years ago. When he finished reading, he didn't move. He just stared at the letter. His shoulders slumped. A single tear traced a path down his weathered cheek and fell onto the page, mingling with ink that was already 23 years old. "All this time," he whispered, his voice ragged. "All these years I thought she stopped loving me. I thought I had done something. I drove myself mad trying to figure out what I did wrong." "She never stopped loving you," Ilara said softly, the words feeling both inadequate and essential. "She did this because she loved you and me." He finally looked up at her, his eyes filled with a pain so immense it was difficult to witness. It was the pain of 2 decades of unanswered questions, of a life not lived of a daughter he never knew he had. "My parents," he said, his voice laced with a cold, quiet fury. "Their snobbery, their pride, they destroyed 3 Liffies with a single conversation they never knew she heard." He shook his head, a bitter laugh escaping him. "The irony is, I cut them out of my life 5 years after Clara Ara left. I built this empire on my own terms, without their help, without their approval. I did it all to prove that I didn't need their world. But she was already gone. The silence in the room was vast, filled with the ghosts of what might have been. A father, a mother, a daughter, a family that never was." Arthur slowly stood up and walked over to her. He was no longer the imposing titan of industry. He looked old, tired, and profoundly sad. He stopped a few feet away, as if unsure of the protocol for meeting the 22-year-old stranger who was his child. "You have her eyes," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "The same for the same spirit." Era felt a fresh wave of tears well up. For her entire life she had been a Vance, a legacy of one. Now standing before her was a Blackwood, her father. The word felt clumsy and alien in her mind. "I don't know what to do now," she confessed, her voice a whisper. "I don't know what this means." "It means," he said, taking a hesitant step closer, "that we have 22 years to make up for. It means I am so sorry, Alara. So sorry for the life you should have had. So sorry for everything you and your mother went through alone." He opened his arms, a silent, uncertain invitation. After a moment's hesitation, Era stepped into them. As her father's arms closed around her for the first time, she buried her face in his shoulder and finally let go of the last of her defenses. She cried. She cried for the mother she had lost, for the father she had just found, and for the beautiful, tragic story that was finally terribly complete. It was not a hug of celebration, but of shared, profound grief. A father and daughter united at last by a love that had cost them everything. The days that followed were a surreal exercise in navigating a new reality. There was no magical transformation, no grand cinematic moment where Aurara's life of ramen and bus passes was suddenly swapped for one of caviar and chauffeured cars. The truth hadn't brought a fairy tale ending. It had unearthed a fragile, complicated, and utterly terrifying beginning. The chasm between Ara Vance, the waitress from Queens, and Ara Blackwood, the secret daughter of a billionaire, felt miles wide. Their first attempt to bridge it was a disaster. Arthur, in a well-intentioned but clumsy gesture, made a reservation at Aurelia, a restaurant where the tasting menu cost more than Ara's monthly rent. She sat stiffly in a dress she'd bought on clearance, feeling like a child playing dress up in her mother's clothes. The waiters moved with silent, unnerving grace, and the clinking of their silverware seemed to echo in the cavernous, hushed dining room. "Mom would have hated this place," Aurora said, breaking a long, uncomfortable silence. "She'd say the food was trying too hard to be art, and the people were trying too hard to be important." Arthur flinched slightly at the comment, but then gave a sad, knowing smile. "You're right. She would have. She'd have made a joke about the foam on the sea bass looking like dish soap." He paused, looking at Lara across the expanse of white linen. I forget sometimes how to be a person outside of a boardroom. For 20 years, this is how I've connected with people through grand gestures, through transactions. I don't know any other way. We have to find one, Ara said softly, but with a firm resolve that was pure, Clara Ara, because this isn't real. My life, the one she gave me, is real. The struggles are real, and you can't just erase them. This became their first most significant hurdle. Arthur's instinct was to solve every problem with money. When he learned of her student debt, he immediately had Beatrice draw up the paperwork to clear it. Ayer found the offer on her email the next morning and felt a surprising surge of anger. She called him, her voice trembling. "You don't get it," she said, pacing her tiny apartment. "That debt, I earned it. That degree, I haven't finished. I worked for it. My mom worked 2 jobs so I could even start. It's the story of my life. You can't just put a price on it and pay it off like it's an overdue invoice. You're trying to buy your way into my past, and it's not for sale." On the other end of the line, Arthur was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was humbled. "You are right. I'm sorry. I'm trying to fix the past when I should be trying to build a future." It was the first of many lessons he would have to learn about his daughter. She did not want a benefactor. She wanted a father. Slowly, they began to find a different rhythm. They abandoned the fancy restaurants for diners in her neighborhood, where Ara would watch, amused as her billionaire father awkwardly navigated ordering a coffee that didn't have a fancy Italian name. They spent a Sunday walking through Greenwich Village, where he pointed out the small, now defunct gallery where he first saw Claire, the stoop of the apartment they had shared, the bench in Washington Square Park, where they'd spent hours talking. With every story, the ghost of the penniless musician faded, replaced by the solid, breathing reality of the man beside her. A man who was flawed, powerful, and more vulnerable than he let the world see. A pivotal moment came not from Arthur, but from his assistant. While waiting for him to finish an urgent call in his office, Beatrice Hayes brought a cup of tea. For a moment, they sat in the quiet, professional silence that was Beatrix's domain. "He never gave up hope, you know," the older woman said, her stern facade softening for the first time. For the first 10 years, the private investigators were on a permanent retainer. He followed up on every lead, no matter how small. A woman with Clara Ara's laugh reported in Ohio, a painter with her eyes seen in Oregon. He flew to both places himself. She sighed, looking towards Arthur's closed door. After a while, the search became quieter, but it never stopped. Every year on the anniversary of the day she left, he would cancel all his meetings and just sit in here with that photo album. He wasn't just grieving a lost love, Miss Vance. He was mourning a life he couldn't understand why he'd lost your mother's letter. It didn't just give him a daughter, it gave him peace. Beatrice's words were a gift. They confirmed from an objective source the depth of Arthur's love. He hadn't just moved on. He had been frozen in time, just as her mother had been. The following week, Arthur told her he had somewhere special to take her. The drive was quiet, filled with a nervous anticipation. He pulled up in front of a modest but elegant building downtown, a tastefully designed storefront with the name The Easel and Eye Gallery etched in the glass. "I bought this place about 10 years ago," he explained, turning off the engine. "It was the first gallery that ever agreed to show one of Clara's paintings, back when she was just starting out. It was failing, so I bought it. I've kept it running ever since, funding it anonymously. It's a non-profit now dedicated to showcasing emerging local artists, the kind of people Clara Ara would have championed." Ara's heart swelled. This was not a grand empty gesture. This was a quiet, meaningful tribute, a way he had kept a part of her alive all these years. He led her inside. The gallery was bright and airy, filled with vibrant, challenging art that buzzed with raw talent. And there, in the main atrium, in a place of singular honor, hung one painting. It was a large canvas, a chaotic and beautiful abstract seascape. Swirling violent strokes of deep navy and indigo crashed against hopeful slivers of emerald green and turquoise. In the distance, a tiny, almost imperceptible speck of white suggested a lone sailboat tossed on the tumultuous waves. It was breathtaking. It was her mother's soul rendered in oil and pigment. "It's the only original of hers I ever managed to find," Arthur said, his voice thick with emotion. "I bought it at an auction years ago from a private collector. I had to outbid a museum for it." He gestured to the small brass plaque at the bottom of the frame. Ilara leaned in to read the title, An Ocean Apart. The words hit her with the force of a physical blow. That was it. That was the perfect heartbreaking metaphor for her parents' story. The ocean of class and expectation that had separated them. The ocean of time they had lost. The ocean of secrets and lies. Her mother had constructed to keep her safe, and now the emotional ocean that she and her father were so carefully trying to cross one tentative conversation at a time. Tears streamed down her face, but for the first time they were not tears of sorrow alone. They were tears of understanding, of catharsis. In that single painting, she could see her mother's fierce passion, her terrible sacrifice, and her father's undying patient devotion. It was the entire tragic story told without a single word. She knew you'd see it one day, Ilara whispered, not entirely sure if she believed it, but needing to. She knew you'd understand. Arthur didn't reply. He simply reached out and took her hand, his grip firm and sure. They stood there for a long time, a father and a daughter, no longer strangers, but survivors of the same shipwreck. The ocean between them was still vast, but for the first time, in the quiet light of the gallery built by love and memory, they could finally see the opposite shore. Ara and Arthur's journey is just beginning. They can never get back the 22 years they lost, but they can build a future on the foundation of a truth that was in itself an act of profound love. Their story reminds us that life is rarely simple, that people make impossible choices for reasons we may never understand, and that the deepest wounds can often lead to the most unexpected healing. The lies we are told are not always meant to deceive, but sometimes to protect. If this story of a daughter's search, a mother's sacrifice, and a father's enduring love resonated with you, please let us know by hitting the like button. Share this video with friends and family who appreciate stories that capture the complexity of the human heart. And don't forget to subscribe for more real-life dramas that explore the ties that bind us. In the comments below, tell us what you think the most difficult part of their new relationship will be. Thank you for listening.